The Still Loading Podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people like Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Gilmer, Matt aka Stormageddon, Ryan K, Stephen P, and Mr. Biscuits have all been wonderful enough to support the show over there. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode, along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything it has to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, Mein Leben! Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today's episode, it is the kickoff or punch-off of Punch-a-Nazi Month, as it were. Yes, we are starting a new series. Who knows, maybe this will be annual. I don't know just yet, but at least as of right now, we are kicking off a little 3-week series called Punch-a-Nazi Month. And you know, it's not topical whatsoever. I just want to talk about games about punching some goddamn Nazis for reasons. I also want to give a quick shout out to kind of the inspiration for Punch-a-Nazi Month here. Big Bang Mike, aka actually Mike Olasky, aka Big Bang Mike, over on Instagram and TikTok. He had a series that started off in the beginning around January called Punch-a-Nazi, where he was teaching, he's a mixed martial artist. He actually also was a child actor who was in the 3 Ninjas movies, specifically the 4th one, High Noon at Mega Mountain, a favorite of mine. But he did a whole series about proper punching techniques of how to punch a Nazi that gave me the idea for Punch-a-Nazi Month. And he was nice enough to allow me to use some art he commissioned of him punching a Nazi as the promo art for this series. So I just want to give a quick shout out and thank you to Mike Olasky, aka Big Bang Mike, for the inspiration for this and for allowing me to use the promo art. All right, so we're here to talk about the granddaddy of Nazi games. Maybe, not really the granddaddy. That could be debated, I guess. I don't know. But we're here to talk about Wolfenstein 3D. And joining me to talk about Wolfenstein 3D, let me throw it over to a guest who has not been on since the link to the past episode a year or two ago. We got Ashton from the Retro Hangover Podcast. Ashton, how are you doing today?
Hey, Josh. Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm always ready to punch stuff, and especially Nazis. So.
That sounds convincing. I'm always ready to punch stuff. Thanks for joining me.
Secret is I'm always angry. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you for joining me, Ashton. A pleasure having you back on the show. And another returning guest, I believe from the Chrono Trigger episode, but I don't remember if there was one in between that. My memory's getting fuzzy, but we have author Aidan Moher on today. Aidan, how are you doing today?
I'm ready to punch some Nazis and chew some bubble gum, and I'm all out of gum.
Oh, yeah.
That's the right game series, right? That's what we're talking about today?
Duke Nazis.
Muddling our FPS, but yeah.
I'm doing very good. Thanks for having me again, Josh.
Thanks for coming back on. I was about to say thanks for having you back on again. That's not English. Thanks for coming back on again, man. Always a pleasure having you on the show. Looking forward to this discussion, this kickoff of Punch-a-Nazi Month. And we're, like we said at the top, we were talking about Wolfenstein 3D, which originally, at least according to Wikipedia, came out on May 5th, 1992 for DOS, and then obviously eventually got ported to a myriad of consoles and different places and systems and computer types and all over the freaking place. There's a lot of ports of this game, but we are talking about the original, I guess the closest thing to an original first person shooter. Is there an earlier first person shooter? Do either of you know?
There was stuff like what
Oh, actually, yes, there was
Baseball,
because it even made stuff that's
Catacomb 3D.
predecessor.
Yeah.
Yeah, Catacombs, which I even have in my freaking notes. I'm silly. Yes, Catacombs 3D, and then also there was another 3D game that they made before that, which
It was Hover
was
Tank.
Hover Tank. Thank you. So Catacomb 3D and Hover Tank 3D. So yeah, I get this was kind of the one that I guess popularized
Yeah.
first person shooters, and also kind of is maybe would you say the progenitor of the boomer shooter, like the fast paced frenetic action that boomer shooters are now known for.
I would say yeah, but I'm not an expert.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there. One, when I think of boomer shooters, I think of Rise of the Triad, which was
Mm.
based on the Wolfenstein engine and was meant to be like a Wolfenstein sequel at one point. So I think there's a pretty straight line between boomer shooters and Wolfenstein.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of invented the boomer shooter with Doom and everything. So, but yeah,
The stuff
sorry,
made
what?
today feels more like that next gen of like post Doom shooters, stuff like Blood or even like Quake, rather than
Right.
going all the way back to Doom. But I
See,
mean,
I
the
guess
through line is there.
Doom just feels like a boomer shooter to me, just because, like, to me, a boomer shooter is like frenetic, fast paced, unrealistic action, right? Like you just there's physics don't matter all that much. You just shoot and you just spray and pray. That's kind of how like I envision it. Like it has to be fast paced. It can't be like a methodical type of shooter. Like you can use, tactics and other stuff, but it's a lot more based on like the frenetic action than anything else.
Mm.
And that's why I kind of thought like even Wolfenstein 3D has elements of that, but we'll get into all that. I think the first thing we should get into, now that we've had a very very small discussion on the history of boomer shooters, which not comprehensive. If anyone's quoting us on this, we didn't really think that put that much thought into it, but we're here to talk about Wolfenstein 3D, and as we always do, we start off with personal experiences. And I don't actually have a lot on this one. I played a little bit when I was younger, but and normally I've been doing this. It happened all with Mario Month, but as with Mario Month, I don't have a lot of experience with this game. So I don't have much to really add to it. So I would hate to end the personal experience section on like, well, I barely touched it, because that's, I remember playing like bits of it on like people's computers on like friends' houses, but never really seriously got into it. And then, playing it for this, I didn't get very far into it again, because once you kind of play the first few levels, you kind of get the idea of it. And unless you want to spend like however long, it's like 4 or 5 hours, just it's a very simplistic gameplay loop. It wasn't going to be something I think I could have stomached for that long, just because I've played so many other shooters since then. But that's at least my personal experience with it. I'm going to throw it over to you first, Aidan. What's your personal experience and history with Wolfenstein 3D?
Yeah, I go way back, like pre-Doom, with Wolfenstein 3D. So I had a dad who was fairly tech savvy. He was a writer, and so he always was kind of bringing in new computers. And so I go back to playing Wolf 3D in DOS.
Okay.
I was playing Wolfenstein 3D on like a black and white laptop way back in the day, like LCD laptop.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I go way back. Shareware, downloading it off the internet way back before that was a thing. And it was just, a game that I sort of ended up getting on my computer. I don't even remember how I would have found out about it, but probably a neighbor, because I remember one of my neighbors had Spear of Destiny, which was like a prequel to Wolfenstein 3D. So it was probably through him that I was finding out about stuff like Wolfenstein 3D, downloading it off, some bulletin board somewhere or via the shareware, official shareware stuff. And I'm mostly familiar with the first level, because I was when did it come out? 1992. So I was I was 8. So like I wasn't dropping $50 to get the full version, and I don't even know if you could get the full version in Canada. Like I'm not sure about that. So I was playing the first episode for sure, over and over and over again. So it doesn't like Wolfenstein 3D is crazy because it has like 60 levels. It's like really long,
huge.
Which is wild. But to me, it feels like it has however many levels. Like it has 8 levels or 9 levels or whatever. And that's mostly what I was familiar with. But this was so like I've been instead of going back to the DOS version in preparation for this episode, I've been playing all sorts of weird, wacky ports of Wolfenstein 3D. Like Super Nintendo version. I was playing the Game Boy Advance version. I was playing like a homebrew, like OG Game Boy version. But when I loaded up the Super Nintendo one, it had all this music. And I was like, I don't remember Wolfenstein having music. And so this was like pre-sound card days. Like I didn't have a sound card that could support the music. So I could do sound effects like through the hardware, the computer's built-in hardware, but I couldn't do music. So to me, like Wolfenstein didn't have music. It was just all about those like hilarious, crunchy sound effects that are like so iconic to me. So booting it up and hearing, a MIDI version of the Nazi theme song just felt like really uncanny in 2025.
The Nazi theme song. So no, you're
the
not
Nazi
wrong.
theme song is not in the Super Nintendo version, but in some of the other versions that I was kind of testing out, it was there, and it was just like it didn't feel right. And going through all those halls and breaking out of that jail with like booping and bopping music in the background on the Super Nintendo version, or the Game Boy Advance version does not have music. So comparing those experiences, I'm like, oh no, it feels better to me without the music, which is just such a funny thing to say about a video game. But anyway, I go way back, and I've played Wolfenstein 3D on and off for so long, and it's one of the original games that I found via friends and got off the internet, downloaded off a 56 baud modem, and waited overnight to get the 3.5 megabyte file. Well timed.
Oh man,
really stretching that 56K modem you got going there.
Oh yeah.
It's funny. Ashton, what about yourself? What is your personal history with it?
Hopefully no one called you overnight or just interrupt the whole thing.
Imagine someone trying to call and it was like an emergency and you're like, why didn't you pick up? Like, Wolfenstein,
pick up the phone. Nice. Yeah, somewhat similar. I'm the guy that had the friend who had a dad in IT or something with computers. And so he lived about not even a block, like up the alley, one street from me. And he was into video games, and I just have a lot of memories of going to Caleb's house and playing a lot of DOS games. Commander Keen, we played a lot of, and then I have a lot of memories of playing Wolfenstein. Well, it's blurry, this is 30 years ago plus.
I don't feel old at all. I'm fine.
Yeah. But yeah, I remember Spirit Destiny, remember Wolfenstein 3D. I remember the first and second level of Wolfenstein 3D a lot, and I think that's about as far as we ever got. Yeah, I don't remember if we ever played any other episodes. So similar, it was probably just they downloaded it, shareware situation. But old DOS games, this is something that comes to mind. And yeah, same thing with the sound effects and the music, like just that sound blaster or whatever, making those not so
those crunchy sounds.
Yeah, like it's definitely one of those. I don't often have those like, oh, I'm surprised that this doesn't look as good as I remember. Like I remember it didn't look that good. But when it comes to sounds, I'm like, yeah, I don't remember it sounding this bad on my computer, or like what technology is, incompatible today versus back then and whatever. Specifically with sound effects, but either way, the sound effects did just like a flood of memories of sitting in their unfinished basement with like two computers set up, and one was like the gaming computer where we would play Commander Keen, Doom, Spaceward Ho, like all these random Doom games. I don't remember playing it at my house. I remember playing Wolfenstein at my friend's house. My parents were hippies, so they probably didn't like the guns and the Nazis and stuff. So we had more like the Sierra, King's Quest kind of games. But yeah, when I think of early gaming and early gaming for me was the NES and these old ass DOS games. So when you had mentioned people who had memories playing Wolfenstein, I was like, oh man, I remember playing that all the time when we were kids. It doesn't go a lot further than that. I mean, I played a little bit of Doom, a little bit of Quake, and all that. But yeah, I do remember playing a lot of these early first-person move with the mouse, Mein Leben, all that stuff.
Mein Leben.
Yeah, but the graphics and the sounds are like super nostalgic, and I don't feel like I get to talk about it very much. So maybe that was what prompted me to be like, oh yeah, Wolfenstein, I want to talk about that.
Well, I'm grateful that when I was putting out a pitch on a few Discord servers, you replied and said you'd be interested. I was actually surprised because I put it out on like a bunch of our mutual Discord servers, and nobody signed up for it. I'm like, or no one like even responded. I'm like, this is Wolfenstein. Like, I didn't have a I didn't have a PC. I had a Macintosh until I like early on, and even then, there's no way my parents would let me play Wolfenstein. Are you kidding me? Like, not especially not at the time we had the Mac. And by the time we had a PC and I would have been old enough, like Wolfenstein had been like, was over a decade old. So there was nothing really that I would have really been able to do. And we got a PC late also. We weren't like we were lower middle class. So, we couldn't afford like a new computer every now and then. My parents saved up a ton for that Macintosh in the mid 90s, and that held us over for quite some time. I still remember my dad like getting onto the internet for the first time through Netscape Navigator.
Oh yeah.
With shit like that. But yeah, so Wolfenstein 3D, like we mentioned before, came out on May 5th, 1992. And as both Aidan and Ashton talked about, this game was shareware. And shareware, for those who don't know what it is, I mean, I'm assuming if you're listening to this, you probably do. But, I never know who might be new and getting into gaming history or whatnot. But for those who don't know what shareware is, shareware was a type of distribution method back in the early 90s, or like even the 80s. It's been around for a while. It was around for a while. It became more mainstream in the 90s for sure. But basically, what it was is that game developers would make their game and give away a portion of the game for free. And then if you wanted to play the rest of the game, you would have to buy it. And it'd be kind of like what a demo is, but it was more than just a demo. Like, especially like Wolfenstein 3D, they gave you the first mission, right? The first episode, excuse me. And that wasn't short. Like, that was that was pretty long. Like, that would last you for a little bit of time, especially if you're just getting used to this style game. So it's not like you would have anything to compare it to or have any muscle memory from other games to really get used to this on. So this was like a really big thing, and it was one of the first examples of a really successful shareware like distribution method. I mean, I shouldn't say that it was one of the first, but it was definitely an early one for damn sure. I don't know how much it would go into it, but I at least want to shout it out because I think it's important and I do like game history. There's a book called Shareware Heroes by Richard Moss that goes into all the stories and whatnot of shareware from the 80s and 90s. I have not personally read this, but I've heard nothing but good things. Have either of you read it?
I have not read it, but it's on my radar.
No.
Absolutely. Like, John Romero has a kind of autobiography that goes into sort of the history of shareware and how it teamed up with Apogee to like leverage that distribution model to really drive success for Wolfenstein 3D, but specifically Doom, which is what really sort of blew the lid off things for both those companies.
And it can't really be understated how important the shareware distribution method, was. Like, it really kind of put a lot of these games in people's homes. And it's funny because it's one of those things where because of that, 1 million people have played Wolfenstein or Doom or something like that. But how many of them actually bought the game? Like you got through the first couple missions and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. Am I winning? Is this how I win? you're not really quite sure. So I remember seeing that with a couple other ones, and I remember like when I first started getting into gaming, like first person shooters, it confused the shit out of me. I'm like, what do you mean? There's more than one episode? I was just because it felt like a full game to me at the time, but obviously there was a lot more game. And you mentioned it before, Aidan. This game has what, 40 levels, 60 levels? What was it?
Yeah, it's like 60 levels.
Jesus Christ!
And like, it's funny because they're really maze-like, and so when you're playing through it, if you're going in blind, it feels like a ton of levels, and it's going to take you a long time. But once you know the game really well, you kind of blow through the levels, and it's not actually that big, the experience. But when you're kind of lost and looking around, and every level sort of looks the same, 60 levels like adds up big time. Whereas like somebody who's familiar with the game could probably blow through an episode of 8 levels in, less than 10 minutes or whatever.
Yeah. Well, when we get into this with the gameplay and stuff, but like, what's up with that par? Like, it's like a minute and a half. Like, it took me 10 minutes because I'm clicking on every wall. But like, who decided on the par, the average time to get through a level? But anyway.
But if you read like Romero's book, and like we're probably getting into the weeds a bit, but they were just like a super hyper competitive group of like young guys who were probably playtesting these levels, and the best level kind of like the best run probably set the par. Right. So you have Tom Hall, who maybe made it through this level in a minute and 5 seconds. And then Carmack comes in and, sets a minute and 2 seconds. So they set par at like whatever, a minute better than their best time or whatever.
That's crazy. It's still crazy though to think about. I mean, this game really, there's so much to talk about this game. I think to start this off, I mean, because we touched on it a little bit off mic, but what's interesting about this game isn't necessarily the game itself, but more the context in which around this game was released and how it came to be. So to kind of get into that, I want to start off with talking about where Wolfenstein actually originated from. It is a common misconception that Wolfenstein, the first Wolfenstein game, was the game we're talking about today, Wolfenstein 3D, but it was not. There was a game that came out in 1981 just called Castle Wolfenstein, and it was developed by a man named Silas Warner, and it was published by a company that he actually co-founded called Muse Software. When he was trying to get into making video games, he had already made a few games at the time, like I think 1 or 2 prior to Wolfenstein, but he went to a local 7-Eleven and saw Berserk, the arcade cabinet for Berserk, for the first time, and he just fell in love with the game, but he didn't like its sci-fi aesthetic, and he really liked the idea of this top-down shooter that you saw, and that's kind of like he was mulling around an idea to kind of take that gameplay and kind of turn it into something that's more him and more something that he can iterate on. And he ended up seeing a TV run or a TV rerun or a TV movie, or TV play. Oh, what the fuck? The Guns of Navarone is what I'm trying to say. I can't think of a TV showing. A motion picture. He was seeing a motion picture of the Guns of Navarone. Yeah. And he loved the idea of this, like, people sneaking into a Nazi base, dressing up, trying to complete this type of saboteur mission. And so that kind of spurned on the idea, that kind of was the muse, no pun intended, for his first Wolfenstein game. And like, this game was super influential in and of itself. It was one of the earliest examples of a stealth game, where you could actually, dress up as you could dress up as enemy soldiers. I believe you could even like haul bodies around and stuff like that. I believe you could do that in this original, very primitive, like top-down 2D game. And this game, it had a lot of it inspired other games, not just id Software team, but it also inspired people like Ken Levine, who would make Thief and BioShock. So like, this game was influential in a number of ways, not just in the fact that it spawned Wolfenstein 3D, which then you could make the argument would spawn Doom and the rest of its catalog from there. So yeah, that's a really bare bones. There's a lot more to the original Wolfenstein, but I just add a little bit of context. I thought that would be good to kind of go through at the top. When they were developing the game, id was developing the game. They had finished making the Commander Keen games, which, fun fact, I don't know if either of you knew this, Commander Keen is related to BJ Blazkowicz. Did you guys know this?
Yeah, and they're also related to the Doom guy. It's like that shared universe, which is great.
Yeah, in Doom RPG, you play as BJ Blazkowicz III, and in the Commander Keen's real name is BJ Blazkowicz or William Blazkowicz II. So that implies that BJ Blazkowicz is the grandfather of Commander Keen. So there you go. They were trying. They wanted to make like a first person version of Wolfenstein, and they originally actually included a lot of the same mechanics, like all the stealth mechanics, hiding bodies, and picking locks and wearing disguises. But they ultimately scrapped it because they felt it slowed down the gameplay too much, and they liked the fast frenetic action. Like, it was a much faster version than the other first person shooters they had made prior. So they scrapped all the stealth stuff and just kept with the game we know now, obviously. But they weren't quite sure if they were going to be able to get the trademark for the game, because they wanted to do Wolfenstein. Well, John Romero, convinced the rest of the team to go with a Wolfenstein, like a Wolfenstein license for this. And they weren't quite sure if they were going to be able to get the license. They had already started working on the game. Luckily, they were able to buy the trademark off of some woman in Baltimore. That's all. Do either of you know anything more than that? Like, I just saw from the gaming historian's video that it was just a woman in Baltimore. That's all he had. Does anyone know if there's anything more than this? I should have done a little bit more research onto this woman from Baltimore.
Yeah, I think Muse just went under, and so its IP was just sort of sold off, probably at auction or whatever, or transferred over to some person. So I don't think there is much more of a story there, other than the fact that it just
some lady in Baltimore.
Yeah, lost to the annals of time.
Well, before they got the rights to Wolfenstein, they were planning some alternate names and just in case that shit went south and they could not get the rights to Wolfenstein. So some of the names that they had, and this is from Did You Know Gaming, they have the Fourth Reich, deep in Germany. How do you Dusseldorf? Castle Hasselhoff. That's my favorite. Castle Hasselhoff. Adolf's
missed
Bane.
Opportunity.
Thank you very much. I like that. Oh my gosh, this one hurts me. Luger Me Now. That one hurts a little bit. Dolk Teufel. I don't know if I'm even saying that correctly, which means Devil Dagger. Geruch Schlecht, which is bad smell. And I apologize to any German listeners who was like listening to this and like, God damn, that's an American ass mispronunciation already. Eisenschwert, which is iron sword, and then Schattensendener, which is shadow sender. So that's all the ones that I saw.
Took 3 years of German in high school, so let me help you out here.
There you go for it.
no, you did pretty good. Schentensender.
But it's an A.
But, huh?
There's an A. There's no umlauts over it.
Shanten. Okay, yeah. I was just joking. No.
Fair enough.
Iron Sword is a different game, so let's table that for now.
Is Iron Sword? Anyway, I personally like Castle Hasselhoff. That's kind of like my favorite here. It just kind of works really well. They also considered the name Castle Hollowhammer, which since they did not go with, they actually named that a castle, which was used in episode 2 of, or maybe it was episode 3. Let me look at the missions here. It might have been episode 3. It looks like it was mission 3. Castle Hollowhammer is from mission 3 in which is levels 9 through 14 of the game. So yeah, that is the names, at least that I'm aware of. And there's so much more that we could go into, like how it was developed. I have so many notes on different things, which I don't even know where to start. I'll just as we go through the game, I'll see if I can find ways to mix them in. But I think we have a pretty good overview of like the game and like a little bit of the history on it and context and whatnot. Do either of you have anything you'd like to add to this though? Just some of the historical stuff for this game.
One of my like favorite anecdotes from just watching a bunch of YouTube on Wolfenstein 3D today was that apparently, I can't remember who it was, but somebody on the id team kind of had to sit the team down and give them a lesson on sort of World War II and German
Oh,
culture and
yeah.
society, because like I guess in the original draft of like the instruction manual or something, or some story Bible, they just referred to all the Nazis as Germans, just like a blanket like statement. And so I can kind of see how we ended up with, some some of the names that ended up on that list were obviously not really taking the subject material very seriously. And it kind of shows that this was a very young team that probably didn't exactly know what they were handling, or the seriousness of the topic they were handling.
No, I think
That
that's
feels topical.
Wait, sorry, what Ashton?
It just feels topical with the way
What
the internet.
What do you mean?
And,
Whatever could you mean?
Just the way things get released, and I'm like constantly having to teach my kids stuff. Like, okay, I see why it's funny, but I don't think you have all the context here.
No, and it's hard to really let people like know the gravity of the context, especially when you're younger, right? Like when you don't have that sense of like you don't have anything to compare it to. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's why like more absurd and I shouldn't say absurd, but more like edgy humor appeals to younger people, because then the older you get, the more you have to compare it to. Like you become more aware of more real world consequences and stuff like that. But Aidan, I think you bring up a good point. And the guy who actually talked to the team was sound designer Bobby Prince, who had to kind of give them a little bit of a history lesson, as it were. And we talked about this off mic, and I think this, Aidan, you led into this bit of the conversation so perfectly. I didn't know when we would get to this in the episode. It happens to be now before the gameplay, but this game I found really, it kind of leads into a topic about how to handle this type of subject matter. Well, Nazis and World War II and stuff like that. And, before even researching this episode, I think what really hit it home is just what you brought up there. Where when I was doing research for it, I was like, oh man, this is just a fun game about shooting some Nazis and this and that, and it is fun. Like I'm not, still if you enjoy this game, I'm not trying to take anything away from that, but a little behind the scenes. This is actually the second episode of Punch a Nazi Month that I've recorded, and the first one I did was Medal of Honor Underground. And seeing the way these two games approach the subject matter of Nazis is nose-bleedingly wild. It is so like they are so far removed from each other. Like Medal of Honor Underground is, and you'll hear it more about it next week, listeners, but it is a game that reveres and it really tries to paint the context of the sacrifice and the horrific nature of what happened during World War II. And in that game you play as a French resistance fighter named Manon Baptiste, based off of a real woman French resistance fighter during World War II named, I think, Helene Deschamps. If I remember correctly, you'll hear it on the episode, and I'll still butcher the name over there as well. But it's so nosebleedy with this, like just going back and forth, like going from this game to what I grew up with the Medal of Honor series. That was like my first experience in playing like games like involving World War II and Nazis and stuff like that. And this one, I think there's ways to take the piss out of Nazis, like kind of what Mel Brooks does with his movies and whatnot, and in a way that it defangs them. And I don't think this game does a good job of that. It almost feels a little too like ignorant to what it's actually happening. But I really don't know my own feeling on this. Like I know this is a very heavy conversation, but I feel like if we're going to be making jokes for the rest of the month about punching Nazis, we should at least have this conversation about this type of subject matter. So I don't really know where I'm going with this. Do either of you have any thoughts on how they handled the subject matter in this game?
I mean, I think it just does show how young the team was, but also probably speaks to what you had a generation who was born after the war, right? Coming of age in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of culturally, we were probably at a point where this next generation of people being born after the war were processing and understanding it in ways that made sense to them. I think that it extends like deeply into how like not that we should get into the subject of like historical accuracy in games, but like, everybody knows the Mein Leben like scream that everybody like the Nazis yell when they get killed, and it's kind of a joke, but it's also just goofy, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds goofy, and they're yelling "my life" essentially, which just sort of shows that like this was a group of like kids, as intensely working on something that was technically very profound, from a game design perspective, was so ahead of the curve, but they weren't really putting a lot of thought necessarily into stuff like world building or realism, or even like a level of respect for what the war did to the world, or even a cultural or political understanding of what that meant to a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I don't want to like harp on it too much either, because like there was no ill intent with any of this either, right? Like there was no like they weren't trying to make light of the severity of it. They're just like, what's the best bad guy in almost any, like you can do no wrong with making Nazis the bad guy. They can be literally any, and like it's the automatic evil. It's so easy to use Nazis as enemies because you never have to justify it, right? Like they're always the enemy they're always evil and the enemy for very obvious and good reasons, right? So I get it from that standpoint, but it's like, yeah, there's just so many, like, it almost is a little too silly for the subject matter, and I'm not trying to, I don't want to like harsh the buzz, I guess, too much with it, but at the same time, I don't know, I'm very, my feelings on this are very mixed, just because after watching the gaming historian's video on this and how they had to be educated a little bit from someone else on, like, not all Germans were Nazis, and then when you look in like other parts of the world at how much this game was banned because of the Nazi iconography, and because they even used the Nazi the Nazi theme song as we described it earlier, but the Nazi anthem in the on the title screen of the game, like, I don't know, it really much it seems like it's trying to take the piss out of Nazis, but not doing it in the most effective way. And I don't really have much more to say on that. But Ashton, do you have anything to add?
So yeah, you can go a lot of directions. What is the responsibility of this game, I guess, is kind of where my mind first goes. Like, is it to educate? Not really. It's a video game. It is like, who's it for? It's for kids. Is it making this stuff too silly, too unrealistic, I guess? Maybe, but I don't know. Like, if you're getting your history from Wolfenstein 3D, I think that's that's more the issue there. I don't want to give them a pass, and like you're saying, like, is it that is the question? Is it taking it too much? Like, is it making them Wile E. Coyote or something? Like, is it making it a cartoon of an actual evil, destructive, force in the world? Yeah, it is both a good question to ask, and maybe like,
Not
okay,
take it too seriously either. Like,
we're just putting some pixels on the screen, and
yeah,
and we have a score at the end, So, so that's one way that I don't really have a good answer for, to be honest. The other way is, I think there's something to be said for using either comedy, entertainment, video games to open a conversation or explore a subject matter. I guess it's more in that taking the piss out of phrase you keep using. Like, can we take away their power by making them the bad guy that you just have to shoot to get more points? Can it, in the early days of like satirical comedy, it was a way of like challenging authority that was doing things that were wrong. Like, in that sense, like, is it another way to be like, remember this bad thing? It was bad. Don't forget it was bad.
mm-hmm.
They're the bad guys. Um, there does seem to be some sort of disconnect when we start to go from generation to generation, when it's like, yes, you're essentially, in warfare, murdering Nazis and making a game out of it. Like, I was thinking a lot about this when I was playing it, and like how I want my kids to experience video games. And it's like, generally speaking, like, yeah, I'm not a fan of like, let's shoot guns at other people. I'd rather like slash a sword at a monster. That feels like a safer zone to be in. But it's like, and my kids are like, why are you playing this game with guns, Dad? You don't like guns. And I'm like, well, they're Nazis. I'm like, well, they're Nazis. And, it's war, that's a totally different situation than having different people with also guns. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know. I'm not trying to say like the conversation is moot because the situation's so different, but
I think
I'm kind of with you, Josh. Like, I don't exactly know where I land because I can see a lot of both sides of the argument. It is in a sense, it can be a super sensitive topic to, a horrible situation that people went through generations ago. And is it being too diluted, even 30 years ago, and then talking about it today? I'm not educated enough to answer that, I guess.
But yeah, and just to be clear, listeners, I hope this like heavy conversation at the top of the episode hasn't turned too many of y'all off. But I was thinking about it before recording, like genuinely, there's not really like I don't think this game needs to be as taken as seriously as the conversation we're having. It's not meant to be taken seriously. It's a fun romp made by a bunch of people from 1991, but released in 1992. Like, they're not when this game came out, they're obviously not trying to like downplay the severity of the Nazis, right? They were just trying to make a fun shooter, and Nazis are an easy bad guy. This conversation more was just now with 30 years of context and like stuff going on. Is this a good is this something that's constructive now? You know what I mean? I think that's more what I'm kind of getting at. Not was it a problem when it came out, and not even if obviously it really, it's not like they're making this game now. It came out 30 years ago. So like, I don't know. I don't really have an answer. I don't really have like, we're going to definitively close off this. This is the end all be all type of thing. Nor do I think that's constructive for almost any conversation. But like, at least with this, I at least want to just bring up this type of this topic, because when I was playing this and then, researching this, and then when I played Medal of Honor, and just like I mentioned at the top of this segment, like just the tonal shift, like Medal of Honor, they like before and after every mission, you get a little mini World War II documentary telling you about the real life sacrifices of the people that went through it. Fucking what was so cool at the end of Medal of Honor Underground, and I'm sorry that I'm kind of giving away some of the conversation for next week, but I was really happy with how the episode turned out. The end credits features them showing their interviews with actual resistance fighters, all women resistance fighters, of them interviewing what they had to do during the war. Some of them were more working on like the home front, but it was all about how they played a part in taking down this fascist regime in France. It was a really cool, maybe not just France, but just the war effort in general. And having that context, it like that game to me feels almost like you're taking the piss out of the Nazis, because you're literally just, going through and shooting them all. But then you're also getting the historical context. And I'm not saying every game that has Nazis as the enemies needs to be that. But I guess just having that nosebleed of a juxtaposition is what brought this conversation to the forefront for me. So do either of you have anything more to say before we move on? I know it's kind of like not really a satisfying conclusion per se, but I don't know my own feelings on this. I just wanted to kind of poke at the edges a little bit, as it were.
I mean, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe we needed to continue to just satirize and punch Nazis in games.
Yeah.
Is the inverse true, that we've come to this point where there's too much pearl clutching and conversation about humanizing bad people? You know, have we ceded too much ground to people who would be like, oh no, like you shouldn't punch Nazis? You know, that just, you know, leads into the game they want
That's
to play.
true.
Whatever. You know, so is the opposite true, that we should have continued to just make, you know, ridicule of Nazis and Nazi culture, and maybe that would have been more effective in the long term? Like maybe just painting them as, you know, like these guys just fucking suck and there is no moral or ethical qualm with what's going on in this game.
That's true.
You know, we'll get to talking about some of the other versions of Wolfenstein later, but one of the things I find really striking about the Super Nintendo version is that it was Nintendo in the 90s, and so they applied a lot of like you know, censorship to the game, like legitimate censorship, pulling content out because they weren't comfortable with how it, you know, communicated. But by pulling out the Nazi iconography, all of a sudden you're like shooting regular people, just random faceless soldiers, and
That's
you don't
true.
know their story. You know, you're not going after Hitler, you're going after some guy. And is that better? Is like killing faceless soldiers that, you know, have no history and are generic humans, is
Yeah.
that better than shooting Nazis? Nintendo thought so, but I didn't really feel like that held up very well in hindsight. And so I don't know, maybe like Wolfenstein had it right in the first place. Like,
You bring up a good point though, because if you think about like the kind of the rise and fall of World War II shooters, right? You know, super popular throughout the 90s and into the early to mid 2000s. And, you know, even early Call of Duty was a World War II first person shooter. And then Call of Duty turned into war porn. And other games like it that try to emulate, you know, and all of it ended up being, because it was all reaction to, you know, America's war in Iraq. It all ended up being people from the Middle East now, which weren't. It's not like it was even necessarily like a Nazi regime. It was just, you know, I don't know all the ins and outs of the geopolitical stuff that has happened over the last 15 years. I just know America's fucked up a lot. That's all I'm gonna. That is it in a nutshell,
It's a
right?
good summary.
It's a very concise summary. And I'm not trying to make light of it either, just to be clear. I'm just not well versed enough. I haven't done enough research on it to really comment on it. And it's also not really germane to this game. But I almost wonder if not because of it, but like if you look at what happened was we replaced all the enemies in first person shooters with the most easily recognizable personification of evil, with now enemies that are more gray. Like you could make the argument, there is a very clear argument that, you know, there's a lot more gray area in this. You know, we're invading their land, and, you know, we've meddled with their politics, which has caused instability in the region, and all this other stuff that I apologize for really not treating with maybe as much sensitivity as I should. But like when you mentioned that, it just got me thinking, like, we transferred from clear evil to ambiguous.
I think a lot about the, you know, no Russian from
Yeah.
Call of Duty game that was way back when, and how that was sort of an inflection point of what you're talking about, where you had these kind of war narratives that were trying to like feel profound, that maybe missed the mark in terms of how they portrayed war and sort of atrocity and ethics within war. And, you know, it was easier when it was just Nazis and then Robo Hitler at the end. You know, that was very unambiguous. And I do wonder where, you know, what is the right thread to you know, the right needle to thread there. And outside of games like you know, Walt Williams' work on I can't remember the name of it. Sorry, there's a ton of noise outside of my garage.
No, it's okay. If you want to look up what you're trying to remember, I can edit this out.
Yeah, and while you were looking that up, it seemed like
Spec Ops: The Line.
Just
That's what it is.
Yeah,
Spec Ops: The Lines.
Well, I did an episode on that with Dave from Tales from the Backlog a year or two ago, or last year maybe.
Yeah.
That's a good. And that was a very different take on the military shooter. In fact, what is it? We were talking about our buddy Chris from Retro Hangover off mic.
Yep.
That's one of his favorite games too, because Chris has talked about it in his episodes that he's talked about it. Like, Chris was in the military and he loves that game because it's not this glorification of war like Call of Duty was and still is. And it's interesting though, because when you see how first person shooters are now, like, yeah, you still have your Call of Duties, but I would almost argue the bigger first person shooters are the one that we've kind of come back around to do like zany stuff. Like, look at like the revival of the boomer shooter with Doom 2016 and the new Wolfenstein games, right? And then even
Sure.
I can't think of many others off the top of my head.
I mean,
but
even like Fortnite's not a first-person shooter, but it fills that space. I think.
Yeah,
that would have been previously
I
like
agree.
filled by something like Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Ashton? I feel like I cut you off.
Oh, yeah. Just about the question of like, not that like we shouldn't have the Nazis be the bad guys, but more like, is it making it too light of it so that it's not taken seriously by the consumer or the player, you know? Or in the case of Nintendo, like I think it comes from a fear of like, is showing this at all a promotion of it, whether we say it's good or bad, by showing it to people? Does it just by putting it out there say that like, oh, this is a thing that you get to have your opinion of, I guess, you know what I mean? Like, and so I agree that the censorship is probably going the wrong direction, where it's sort of trying to bubble it, you know, like, let's not talk about this because it's bad. We don't even want people to think about it. We don't want the possibility of people to think about it and somehow be on their side, you know, like that's not the I don't think that's the correct direction of censorship.
Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, or whatever that expression is.
Yep, exactly. And so I think maybe the original question, Josh, was like, are we making it too silly so that it's not even a serious threat that we need to remember to be like, don't be like that, or like let's not forget that this was history and we can get to that point where we have crazy people in charge doing really bad shit that we need to stop, you know, because it's zany and might live in, you know, like there's arguments to be made, and I think that ultimately sometimes people, you know, make decisions hopefully with the best intents of like, I'm trying to protect the children or whatever, so they don't accidentally become Nazis. You know, it's a bit of a goofy logic ultimately. But I think it's not like, oh, we don't want anyone to look bad, or, you know, it does get to that point, unfortunately, where like, you know, all violence is bad, even against Nazis. Like, that's also silly, you know? But yes, we're a bit talking in circles here, but yeah, they were trying to make a game where you shoot bad guys and the pixels go blah and you get more points.
Yes.
And now in retrospect, we can look back and say, what effect has that had on the culture at large? You know, what ultimately, I think it hasn't moved the needle one way or the other as far as other things have, unfortunately. But again, I think to answer sort of the future question of like, did it go too silly? I don't think. Again, just kind of hearing the question, like, I don't know. Like, I don't think it did. I think because it still leaves room to say, like, it still leaves a conversation of like, if somebody were to ask, like, what's up with these symbols I keep seeing? And hopefully they meet an informed person who can say, this was an actual historical event, that a lot of terrible things happened. Enough time has passed that we can sort of learn about it. And, you know, if nothing else, you're playing the hero who's trying to stop them from doing the bad stuff. You know?
What I do think is interesting is like the id Team created their version of Wolfenstein based on an abstraction created by Muse, based on an abstraction that was created by whoever made the movie that inspired the original Wolfenstein. And so you do sort of have dilution of ideas through all of that, right? I don't think the id guys thought this was goofy. also, right? Like they were working with like extreme like technical constraints, and they were breaking ground technologically, and it probably felt pretty edgy and like, you know, hardcore to them. It probably didn't seem silly to them at the time too. And so that sort of intent was also, you know, probably felt edgy at the time to, you know, have human enemies in sort of a graphically violent game like that. And the fact that it was Nazis sort of gave them that license to be able to explore that space without
to get away with the extra
get
violence
away
and
with it,
gore.
in a way that you couldn't have otherwise. Nintendo was always gonna like rein that stuff back in, right? Because they were afraid not of the kids seeing this stuff, but of their parents seeing that stuff in the games. So maybe it was more that Wolfenstein just like was never going to work on the Super Nintendo because it's kind of sort of like foundational, you know, creative aspects were just not compatible with what Nintendo was comfortable with putting out, which seems like a no-brainer looking back.
Yeah, that's funny when we have these discussions on these podcasts talking about these 30, 20-year-old games. I do sometimes think that, like, I'm not sure that the developers at the time were thinking like, 25 years from now.
I can almost guarantee that this was not like any like, and nor like it. That's why I was saying at the top, like I hope it didn't. I felt like I was dancing around too much, not because I'm too worried about the sensitivity of the topic, but genuinely because I'm like, am I taking this too seriously? Right? I think this is a conversation that's warranted about games, about like the portrayal of historical events in games in general. Like if you make it too silly or if what all that stuff, I think this conversation is definitely warranted. I don't necessarily think Wolfenstein might be the perfect example of it, but this is the game that got me thinking about it because of this juxtaposition, like I keep referencing, between this and Medal of Honor. Just like it just completely different approaches to how you're handling World War II and Nazis. And the reason I agree with you to an extent, Aidan, that they didn't necessarily think this was goofy, but at the same time, I have a hard time believing that when you have enemies like Mecha Hitler and like, you know, and the goofy yelling out like my name,
was so
like
cool at the time. Like,
I guess
it didn't seem goofy to me when I was 11, and you know, Romero and Tom Hall and Carmax were 19 or 20 or whatever. But I think one thing that's also like really important in all of this is Doom came out like a year after Wolfenstein. So this was sort of like a blip for them as well. And they moved on very quickly to Space Aliens. And like a genuinely sort of gritty and dark and definitely not something that was meant to be goofy. It was meant to be exactly the opposite of goofy. And that was something they replaced Wolfenstein with within a year. And handed off, you know, Spear Destiny to a different developer. And so, you know, this wasn't maybe something that they had a lot of intent, like you were saying, like they weren't thinking about what people were going to say about this game in 25 years. They weren't even thinking about what people were going to be saying about it in a year because they were looking forward to Doom at that point too.
And that's like I said, not to keep reiterating, but that's why I was saying, like, I don't know if we're taking this too seriously, but it's a conversation that came up when I was doing research for it. So I thought what better time really to have it when this is the game that kind of sparked the conversation. And to move on though, I think something to add to this, you know, to get off this topic and move on to something else. You brought it up, Aidan, with the violence of this game, right? The sheer violence of it, which not really a lot of people had seen at the time in video games. I mean, obviously games have had violence in them, and a game we're going to be talking about later in Punch Nazi Month has, you know, Bionic Commando has an infamous super violent ending that we'll talk about in that episode. But one thing that was interesting about the development of this is that when they were developing the game, violence was a big issue even before it was published. The retail publisher FormGen spoke to the business partner of id Software, Scott Miller, basically, you know, being concerned, expressing their concern that this is just too violent. I don't know if we can sell this, but really kind of being sticklers about it. And Scott Miller, instead of like trying to talk them down from it, just went to id and went, just make it more violent. Hang skeleton, like he told him to go even further. And that's why when I was playing it, I was thinking about this because they added, you know, like hanging skeletons. They added more blood. There was a kill cam where you would see a slow-mo version of the kill of the boss's like defeat and stuff like that. And they ended up publishing the game, FormGen ended up publishing the game with none of that taken out. They made it more violent, and FormGen still published it. But it just got me thinking, how messed up, listen, I understand it's already, Nazis are evil, not trying to downplay that obviously, but I was just thinking how fucked up to really think about it, that they are just leaving bodies hanging in their dungeon, in their like castle, to the point where they rot to skeletons, right? That takes a long fucking time to do. Like, if you think about that, literally, they were just sitting in there with rotting bodies for like what, a year or two more.
There's just like straight up skeletons in some of the cells.
Like, how long have they, or
yeah.
did they dig up skeletons and were like, this is nice decoration? No, you're not trying to make light of everything, but I just want to.
Hitler's interior decorator. More skeletons.
But like, in speaking of the violence of this game, just the ridiculousness of it, it did kind of set the stage, obviously, for what would come with id games. And while this episode isn't about their next game, Doom obviously is very intrinsically tied with Wolfenstein. It's the next iteration of the first person shooter. So Aidan, I think you want to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, I think like what is really interesting at looking at any of these id games from that period is that they were so like heavily driven on one side by, John Romero being so interested in game design as like a philosophy and a practice. Then you had people who were really into making the story and the settings, guys like Tom Hall. And then you had Carmack on the other side, who was so tech driven, and he was never satisfied with anything that they were making. And so like, there's a great little anecdote in one of the videos online that I watched today. It might've been, I can't remember who it was, but it was talking about John Romero and the rest of the development team getting into an argument about like secret doors in Wolfenstein. And so Wolfenstein is full of secret doors, and they're usually just a panel on the wall. So it might be a painting or it might be a blank space wall. You click on it with the space bar, and then it kind of slides back and over. And it's really clunky. It doesn't really have any like, real world equivalent. Like, doors don't act like that.
What are you talking about? I have, my whole house is full of them.
And Carmack hated it because it looked silly. But the other guys wanted secrets in, and Carmack was like refusing to implement these secret doors.
Mm-hmm.
And then so finally getting close to, I think close to launch, they were like, come on, like, Carmack, we need these doors in there. And he's like, I put the doors in, they're all there. And he just did it without telling anybody.
Yep.
But for him, it was almost like he would move on to the next thing so fast that he was constantly like ahead of not just, the gaming field at large, but even like the people he worked with. And so you look at something like Wolfenstein, and you see that it's a playground for ideas that he wasn't satisfied with and wanted to get better. And within a year, Wolfenstein had come out, and then Doom had come out, and it's such an like astronomical leap over top of what Wolfenstein was doing. In terms of like, complexity of level design, graphics, the speed, everything about it is just like, you never see that sort of leap in a year in gaming anymore. We're so used to like iterative improvements, but Carmack having that drive to just make things better and better and never being satisfied is something that whenever I play an old id game, whether it's Wolfenstein or it's Commander Keen or it's any of the others, you always sort of see that the foundation of ideas that appears in one game and then is like a quantum leap in the next title. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at Wolfenstein as a, game design product, because it isn't necessarily, looking back, the most complex or interesting or groundbreaking game in any one way, but the way that it informed Doom, which then went on to inform, an entire genre for decades, is all there. Like, you can see the bones of it, and you can see the discontent almost in Carmack and Romero and all of them, as they wanted to make bigger and better games.
And even Wolfenstein was a huge leap from their predecessors, from the Catacomb 3D and whatever tank, hover tank 3, whatever it was. That when those games were first coming out, like the original like hover tank or whatever, Was it Hover? I'm so bad at. Well, yeah, Hover Tank. I got it right. Sorry, Hover in the original in Hover Tank 3D. All the textures for the walls were just flat shades, right? There was no there was no texture, mapping was not a thing. It was just flat colors, right? And so they kind of designed the sprites of the enemies to kind of match this like neon look to these walls, which is why all the enemies were like aliens and junk like that. And then when you get to Catacomb 3D, they actually were able to add textures to the wall. Like texture mapping was a thing. And I believe in the gaming historian documentary on this, that was because Romero spoke to a fellow developer, which I'm forgetting the name of the developer and the game that they were working on. But he talked about that with John Carmack, and Carmack was like, I can do that, and then just did it. He just added like texture mapping to the game, and that's why in Catacomb 3D you actually see textures on the walls, and the enemies actually had a little bit more. There was a little bit more visual like variety to the world. But there was even a leap between, like, while that was just a leap between textures between Hover Tank and Catacomb, it was another leap in Wolfenstein 3D where, in Catacomb 3D, you had textures, but it was very simple textures overall. And the enemies were always facing you no matter what. And there was no doors. It was just a maze. Wolfenstein 3D added doors. And because of those doors, even though like that pushback wall is like kind of silly for secrets, I don't know about you, man, but I always got excited when I was able to find a secret. Like I know it may seem a little silly, but being able to like just click around and like hit the enter button, and all of a sudden like, oh shit, there's extra points here, or there's extra ammo, there's a gun that I didn't know I could get like early on. Like that type of shit I love. I love in first person shooters where you can get stuff early on if you poke around at the edges of the levels. Like I remember one of the first like Doom clones I ever played, because I played it before I played Doom, was Star Wars Dark Forces. And I fucking love Star Wars Dark Forces. But I remember playing that first level over and over and over again and just exploring all around it and finding all these secrets and stuff like that. And that's kind of how, Wolfenstein 3D felt to me. Like even now, just playing through, because I don't know the game well enough to know where all the secrets are or what the optimal routes through each of the levels are. So you're just kind of exploring and poking at the edges and seeing like, well, what is this, a secret room back here? And every time you find one, you're like, oh shit, I found one. That's really cool. So I don't know. To me, it gives a good sense of discovery, especially even now. Like I didn't grow up with it, so playing it now as an adult, it still is enjoyable to have that sense of discovery. And I think as cheesy as those push walls are, it makes it feel, at least to me, it makes it feel like, oh, this is a secret passage, right? Like think of it like something out of Indiana Jones, where like you find the secret path in the castle behind the fireplace or some shit like that, right? That's what that feels like to me, but done in a little bit more less tastefully, obviously, because I shouldn't say tasteful. That makes it sound like it's like bad, but like in less visually interesting ways. It's just kind of very bare bones, but I think it achieves the same effect. So that way, when you get to Doom and you have all these more secrets, like it kind of set the groundwork for what Doom would. It's just it took that same feeling, and then Doom obviously just elevated it even further.
I think like one of the things with the secrets that when I go back and I think about the game when I play it now, the secrets like change the way I play Wolfenstein 3D versus something like Doom or Quake. Doom and Quake had sort of more like natural secrets. So like, you'd be looking in somewhere, you'd find a switch around a corner and it would open a door that you'd have to go back and find. Wolfenstein 3D, because it had these push panels, like I just remember, and like my experience even now of playing is I just hovering and just sliding along the wall, smashing the spacebar button. So it's just like that's the sound he makes.
Yeah.
Spacebar. And so like my experience playing that, I don't move through the open areas. I just move along and just slide along the walls trying to find secrets. And like I don't know that holds up very well. But again, like you're saying, it shows Wolfenstein 3D as a game that's exploring that space, adding something new to this style of game. That it's not perfect, but it's something new, and it's something that they can kind of continue to work towards perfecting in their upcoming games too.
And I guess, we're an hour into the episode now. We should probably at least discuss what the gameplay is like. I mean, it's going to be a short section. I know.
It's clicking on walls. Weren't you paying attention?
Yeah, you're right. I'm so sorry. You're right. It's just a lot of wall clicking. No, I mean, it is a very bare bones first person shooter. Obviously, it's one of the first, not the first, obviously, but it's one of the games that popularized the genre. And you just kind of run through levels. You have to generally collect key cards from enemies in different levels, so that way you can unlock doors. So that way you can then move on to the next stage. Whether it's to actually literally end a level or you just get into the next portion of the level. There's tons of different weapons that you can choose from. You have rocket launchers, you have chain guns, you have machine guns, you have your pistol. You also have a syringe, apparently. You have a syringe. You can just fucking stab people with a syringe. You also get a knife. There's a lot of other different weapons that I'm probably missing, but those are just like the ones off the top of my head.
There really aren't that many weapons, though. Like, there really is the pistol, the machine gun, and the chain gun. And then other versions have like a rocket launcher. I think the 3DO version had a rocket launcher added and stuff, but it's not like Doom or Quake or like later games where there's a million different weapons. It was like basically just like a linear upgrade from the pistol to the machine gun to the chain gun. They all kind of did the same thing, but better, but less efficiently.
Yeah.
Which was interesting.
And I apologize real quick. Syringes are, because just goes to show how much I played of the game. Syringes are the weapon of choice for Dr. Shabs, who throws them at the player as projectiles.
That's right, boss.
And it turns you into a zombie when you die. Into immediate. Like, that's one of the crazy things, because there really isn't much more to explain about the gameplay. It is just fast, frenetic. There's a small variety of weapons. It works well enough, but it's one of those things like after you've played more modern shooters, it's a little hard to like go back and be like, oh man, this is great. Like, I think Doom is a lot more fun now even than what Wolfenstein is. And like that was kind of like, when I was prepping for this episode, I was worried. I'm like, man, there's going to be like nothing to talk about with the gameplay. The enemies just get progressively harder. The bosses are just essentially bullet sponges with different types of weapons. Like, there's not a whole lot of like complexity or depth to the mechanics. The level design has a little bit of it because it's very maze-like, and it does a good job of making you feel like you get lost in a maze or just hit enter 1,000 times on the wall looking for secrets and whatnot. So there wasn't much to really go into with that. But there was hold on. What I do think is more interesting about the gameplay than besides the context of the history that we've talked to and some of the more serious conversations we had, I think it's just crazy to me how much this game really kind of set the almost not really the formula, but it kind of like cemented the idea of sci-fi Nazi World War II games, right? I don't know if maybe there's a game or some other type of media prior to this. I'm sure there's, at least in movies maybe, but the reason the Nazis work so well, both as just the obvious evil in video games, also for like sci-fi and fantasy stuff, is because during World War II they were searching for occult items, right? They were searching for whether it was like Christian mythology stuff or like different religion stuff, because Hitler was just fucking obsessed with that shit. So at least, maybe I'm completely wrong with that, but at least from my understanding, that was the case. And so because of that, now, obviously, when you see it in movies and in games, it might not be nearly as like fantastical, as it was a lot more obviously violent and brutal, but in real life. But in this, like because they were even like dabbling in the occult and mysticism and shit like that, and you can, like, Medal of Honor even dabbled in it later on. In Medal of Honor Underground, you fight knights, like dudes and knights, because they're into like Templar Order bullshit and whatnot. Like, because of that bits of historical elements, they extrapolated into these ridiculous things where in this, what is it, mission 3, you have to go to this castle where they're experimenting on dead corpses, and you have to, but when you get far enough into the level, it's like levels 9 through 14, or you get far enough in the mission, some of the experiments might end up waiting for you. And then obviously you fight Mecha Hitler later on. Like they have this weird sci-fi fantasy horror like mixture to it, which I think has really cemented that type of like almost like fictional history thing that you see in other outside of Wolfenstein. Would you guys agree with that though?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Hitler had a mech suit in real life. I think it's interesting because you see some of the later Wolfenstein like revivals really lean into that occult side of things, and I think that's a really interesting direction to take that. Take that series. It's also funny because if you go back, Silas Warner, who created the first Wolfenstein, disliked the science fiction aspect of a lot of the games at the time, and he found World War II to be a change of pace and something he wanted to adopt as like about turn. And so to see that Wolfenstein 3D kind of come back and be like, oh, you know what, we're going to add a little bit more of that in there. There's going to be this mad scientist doing genetic experiments and zombies and mech suits and stuff by the time you get to the end. And it's just funny how the series couldn't really escape the stuff that Warner wanted to avoid in the first place. But again, that comes back a little bit to the conversation of like, how in the early 90s were 20-year-old kids writing satire about World War II, just only 40 years or so, 35 years after the end of the war. And like we use, and to elaborate on that, we often use, especially when we're young, if you're like me, you use science fiction and fantasy to contextualize ideas that you're having trouble understanding because they're too big. And so you can simplify them through like science fiction tropes. And I think that's probably a little bit of what was going on there.
That's yeah, I could see that.
Visually too, we were talking about Catacomb 3D and Hover Tank before that, and the way that they used color to visually separate sprites from backgrounds. And it can be really hard if you have a bunch of people just wearing regular suits and regular colors who all look the same. And so adding sort of those sci-fi elements, those occult elements to some of the enemies, especially as you get deeper into the game, just gives them more visual variety, which was probably part of the process they were going through there too.
Yeah. Once you add magic or whatever, it does free you up to allow anything to happen, like
exactly
Mecha Hitler or zombie, whatever.
And then you add zombies, and that gives you an enemy type that can behave differently than a regular human. Right. Yeah. I can't remember if they move slowly in Wolfenstein, but you could have one that moves slowly, but there's a ton of them, which is not a behavior regular humans would do. And so I think it's a clever kind of way to expand on enemy type and variation in a game that has 60 levels. let's not forget they have a lot of space.
Don't run that deep. Yeah.
One of the things I think is really interesting about Wolfenstein is 3D first-person shooter games didn't really exist, as we know them, especially ones that were really sort of story-driven. Like if you can call Warcraft 3D story-driven, but it was one of the first where they recognized like a need to humanize the person you're playing as. Like it's a first person game, so you can't see them. So they, I think Catacomb 3D had the little character portrait of the person that you are, but they brought that really front and center and had it animated in Wolfenstein 3D. And as your health went down, you got more beat up, bloodier. And that was sort of an interesting way to characterize what was going on. I think narratively it was also subversive because you're playing as a big, beefy, blue-eyed, blonde-haired guy, breaking out of these Nazi camps or these Nazi dungeons. And, there's sort of a subversion of you're playing as sort of the ideal, the Nazi ideal, and you're taking down the Nazis. And I think that, there was something interesting about what they were saying there. But one of the cool things is at the end of those 60 levels, you get through the game, you beat Mecha Hitler, and then you get to the exit and you finally, you see like freedom. You can see like a textured wall that looks like outside, and you start moving towards it. And then the camera sort of like does this like rudimentary pan, and all of a sudden you're looking at BJ Blazkowicz running towards the camera, and he sort of like runs, and then like mid stride the scene sort of freezes on him leaving. And I think that that's just such an interesting reward at the end of a game where you've played through 60 levels in first person at a time when that was a new experience for a lot of people to be like, hey, here you are, you did it, this is you, this is you escaping. And so Wolfenstein 3D, I think, was, understood how they were challenged to tell story or build narrative or environmental storytelling through a first person perspective, and had some kind of clever ways to get around that, even if you had to wait until the very end of the game to see some of them.
And it's also a game that told a lot of its story through the manual as well. Because if you don't really, actually, kind of a combo. So the manual helps add context to the story. So the very first episode is escaping from the castle, right? And if you when you go into that level knowing the context of that, and you get out of your cell, like the game begins with a dead body on the floor in front of you and you're holding a gun, so it's showing like you killed your captor and you're going to escape, right? And then you go around and explore. And if you look in the other rooms shortly after you, it's a hallway with like rooms side by side showing prison cells, right? And then you look in the prison cells, and then there's like corpses in some, and maybe some leftover food from a guy who didn't eat type of thing. And I find that really, it's interesting because the game looks so visually similar as you go through, but they did try their hand to actually do a little bit of storytelling with the level design, even though it's a little hard to know where you're going. But I still think they like you were saying, Aidan, they were trying to figure out storytelling in a relatively new relatively new genre, and doing stuff. I had no idea they even turned the camera around so you could look at you BJ Blazkowicz or whatnot. So that's pretty cool. But I didn't think about it. Like once you said that, it got me thinking, like, you know what, they are trying things with this, because they're still trying to figure out how to tell a story in a first person shooter perspective, and they got better at that as time goes on. And obviously early id games aren't necessarily known for their story, right? Like they're more like Doom is more interesting as as a setting than it is necessarily as like a character study. I don't know. Doom guy's a little deep. I don't know. What do you can learn some stuff from Doom guy.
Hey guys, I read the Doom novels back in the day. Yeah.
Did you?
That guy has some depth. Yeah.
Oh my God. But I don't know. I like that. I like that they tried to tell a story, even if it was small, right? Even if it was just done with little bits. Like most of the story bits are actually told in the manual, like what the setup for the missions are, but you can see a little bit of that story play out visually and through the gameplay, through how they design the levels, which is kind of cool.
And again, they took what they learned in that game, Wolfenstein 3D, and like Doom goes so much harder on all of that, right? And again, going back to like Romero's book, and there's a book called Masters of Doom, and you look at like it was predominantly a guy named Tom Hall who was doing a lot of the story writing for these games, and there's so much that they wrote into the story Bible that we just never even see in the games, but they want to communicate through, again, environmental storytelling or the tools that they sort of have in these first person environments, without a lot of like Half-Life and Half-Life 2 hadn't come around yet, right? Those really showed off how to do storytelling in these first person environments. But Doom and Wolfenstein before it had that ambition. They wanted this to feel like a real person doing real things in a real 3D space, which wasn't really the case for games like Catacomb 3D, or certainly not for Hover Tank before it.
What do you mean Hover Tank doesn't have a story?
I'm sure it has a story on the back of the box, but
I wonder if it does actually. I feel bad not knowing. I'm curious. Hover Tank 3D manual. Does it say anything in there? I'd be very curious about that.
Hover Tank, just as a diversion though, to talk about sort of how they were like evolving and learning from the way that they did things. If you watch footage of Hover Tank, it has this like really aggressive head bob. I think it's supposed to look like you're in a hovering tank that's like bobbing. And it's like really kind of hard to look at and hard to watch. And that's something that you can tell that they ended up probably taking out of Catacomb 3D and Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, because it was really disorienting. But the idea was there, and it comes back in Quake. In the original version, as they were developing Quake, Carmack put a head bob in there that wasn't really ever used. They pulled it out because somebody didn't like it or it was too pronounced. But they left it in the scene transition between levels. And so there's like this slight head bob. And it's neat going back and seeing that existing all the way back in Hover Tank, but the idea wasn't ready to be implemented until way later. And I think that's so like true, speaks to all of its games through the like late 80s and 90s, early 90s.
Real quick, I did look up, I found on Catacomb mirahez.org, there's a little wiki on Hover Tank 3D, and if this is correct, this is what it says in the instruction TXT for Hover Tank. The cities are full of nuclear mutants, armored patriots, and other terrors bent on your destruction. You must enter the cities and rescue the innocent humans needing your help. Here's the catch. The nuclear missiles are on their way. You must rescue the people, the ones that are still alive. You are the legendary Hover Tank. Oh, sorry. You and the legendary Hover Tank will not be teleported back to safety until you've accomplished your mission. You have an energy cannon as your main weapon. Holding down the fire button will build up power in the cannon. Release the button to fire. After all the people in the area are rescued or killed, a warp gate will appear. And it may not appear where you teleported in. Other things to know. Watch the time. If that missile arrives, goodbye Hover Tank. Be careful while picking up the people. You don't want them killed by your stray cannon shots. And of course, you get more money for more safely rescued people. Good luck. So there's your story. It's all about the money.
You're telling me it was not Half-Life 2 that revolutionized story.
What are you talking about? Last thing that I do think is funny about Hover Tank, side note, the main screen of it, I might send a picture of this to y'all in Discord. Let me see if I can copy the image here. It's literally like, you know how hovercraft have like the balloon, almost like it almost looks like chocolate bars at the bottom of it, but it's actually just all inflatable like rubber. Mm-hmm. They literally just put that at the bottom of the tank. Like it's a tank mounted on top of the bottom of like an actual hovercraft. It is one of the most surreal things I think I've seen. I'm going to send it to you both in Discord, a picture of it, but it's just so goofy looking. And then it's got a weird like funnel in the front. Like you see the tank and like the tank cannon on the top, but then the front of it almost looks like a loudspeaker coming out the center of it. I don't know if that's
on the side as well. It looks like it's like in Mad Max, how they have those like retrofitted vehicles that have the big stereos on them.
Or is it maybe like does it shoot out air to help move it?
Yeah. Just like they didn't know a lot about World War II history. They didn't know a lot about tank design.
Tank design. Is this where the loudspeakers go?
This shoots fire.
This loudspeaker shoots fire. This little piggy went home.
It's the original.
Apparently, they just blasted like heavy metal, like nonstop in the id offices while they were making these games. So, like, honestly, it could just be like somebody was like, "Oh, it'd be sick, guys. Like, let's put some speakers on this tank."
I wonder if Bobby Prince also had to tell them that's not how tanks are made.
Or speakers.
Or speakers for that. You're right. Do you guys have any other final things to say about Doom? Like I know, like I feel Doom. Oh my God, we've been my bad. Whoops, Freudian slip there.
Any ID game.
No, but let me redo that. Do you guys have any final words to say about Wolfenstein 3D? I feel like I said it before at the top of the episode, this game is much more interesting in its context and its importance in game history than its gameplay. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to touch on that we haven't talked on yet. If there's any favorite guns that you really are dying to talk about, but I'm going to send it off to both of you for final thoughts, just to go over, final thoughts on this game and any other things that we didn't really go over. Ashton, I'll start off with you. Just kind of final thoughts on the game and any other topics you want to touch on?
Sure. Just real quick, something as I was playing more recently after a 30-year hiatus or whatever. It's something I probably could have looked up, but I could not figure out like where did the game want me to shoot the enemies? Because it seemed a little arbitrary, half consistent. Like it seemed almost like they were dying quicker.
What do you mean? Square in the chest. You can't aim up or down. It's all just chest height.
This might be crazy, but it seemed like when I shot to the side from a distance, they died faster than when I was close up on center. And maybe I'm just crazy or a game bug or something like that, but I couldn't figure out where the game wanted me to fire. Like there, it seemed like when the enemies were closer and they shot, I took more damage. And I'm sure there's the actual answer out there somewhere, but just playing it kind of as a refresher, I couldn't figure out, like, where do you want me to shoot? Do you want me to be close? Do you want me to be center? Do you want me offside?
Right in the
I
mush.
didn't play a ton. I only got through the first 2 levels, but it just seemed real inconsistent. Like, it seemed like if I took more modern, like, headshot center kind of game mechanics, that didn't seem to help me at all. Like, if I shot on their shoulder, the only thing that seemed consistent was if they were unaware of me, it seemed to like do more quote unquote damage. But and it's almost not a serious question, but it just as I was playing, it's like, where do you want me to shoot? Close, far away, side, center? I don't know
One
if
of the,
anyone else
I
experienced that.
found
but
that
like,
all really funny to go back to now.
yeah.
Playing it earlier today as well. Now, keeping in mind, I was playing on the Super Nintendo and the Game Boy Advance, and I was playing a web browser version. Like, I was playing all the kooky versions. But like one thing that Wolfenstein 3D uses is like hit scan, like shooting. And so when you press the button, it's just looking at what's on your screen, right? So it's not calculating distance. It's not doing, like, it's like, are you semi lined up with the enemy? Hit the fire button and they're damaged immediately. And same for them. That, like, as soon as the enemy fires, it hits you. There's no like like it kind of changes the way that timing of combat works. And I'm used to like implementing momentum and my movement into when I'm wanting to fire. And so if you're strafing sort of towards somebody, you're going to time it so that as you're strafing by, you kind of hit the button.
Right.
But because Wolfenstein uses this hit scan method, and it's so immediate, you almost are. I was always firing at like just slightly too early, because I was expecting to like hit the button and there to be some timing involved in terms of like the travel speed. And, my brain is just trying to compensate for distance and all that kind of stuff. And it just doesn't exist in the game. And I think maybe that's part of what you're feeling. And it's definitely trippy on a Game Boy Advance or whatever, or like a Super Nintendo at 240p, because you can barely see, like enemies are like in a distance and they're like literally like 15 pixels. So that might have been part of my problem. But
Gotcha. I was playing like I bought the Steam version, so I don't know what other kind of remakes it felt. From what I remember, fairly authentic. And I remember playing Doom a year or two ago, and how it's more kind of like it doesn't matter. There's no like up and down. It's just kind of like center it and you kind of shoot. And so I was familiar with like suspend whatever, I'm accustomed to modern, and just like you're saying, like it's on the screen, shoot it. But I think eventually I got more accustomed to it. But as I was firing it up fresh, that kind of got me. It was funny to be like, I have to relearn how to play this old ass game,
Yeah. Some enemies would take one shot from my pistol and some would take like 4. And I couldn't figure out the difference either, but it's fun. One of my favorite ways to go back to these games is they almost all have source ports at this point, and they just feel like nice to play. Like, I really like going back and playing the old DOS version. It's probably my preferred way, but it's interesting to see like when you have something like Doom with mouse look in it and how that changes the feel of the game, and honestly how well the game holds up with modern, some modern controls and tools applied to it. Just speaks to how well these games were designed going way back. Like, is Wolfenstein 3D like fairly simplistic? Like, yeah, it is. It only has, a small variety of enemies and weapons. The levels are more maze-like than something like Doom or Quake, which had, much more thoughtfully designed levels. But like, it's still pretty fun just to rip through the game and like take out enemies and explore and find secrets. And, that stuff holds up 25 years later, 35 years later. How long ago was that? 35.
91, 92. So you're looking at 33
later, and it's like, it's still a genuinely compelling experience. And like, am I going to sit down and play through the entirety of Wolfenstein. Like, no, I'm not going to do that anymore the way that I would want to with something like Doom. But I had fun playing through like 5 different versions of it, and you know, it holds up, and the foundational like elements that Romero and Carmack and the rest of that id team were working with, like they were just kind of cooking with fundamentals that work, and as long as you have those in a game, it's going to be fun. And I think that goes for so many of, you know, id's games. You saw the same in a lot of like Blizzard's early games as well, right? The fundamentals are just so strong that it doesn't matter if they aged in other ways, you're still going to have an experience that, you know, might not last forever, but is fun while you're spending time with it.
Right. And especially if you're accustomed to the graphical and audio styles, those aren't like a hindrance. And even for me, a nostalgia of like, I was Googling games on Steam, like, are there boomer shooters with the pixel graphics and the like older style, you know, sound effects and things like that? Like, I actually didn't really come across anything that was exactly meeting the mark that the nostalgia of Wolfenstein 3D was giving me with, you know, pixel graphics scale really well because they're just blocks, you know? And so because I am either accustomed to that style or just it appeals to me, I like it, and I'm like, I want to see new games made with this art style, you know, in an homage kind of way or whatever. There was one other thing. The other thing that was kind of funny to me that came back was I realized I was having a little trouble like moving around and aiming, like I kept getting stuck on the wall, and I forgot it was because when I move the mouse forward, it also moves the character forward. and I had to like remember that and be like, oh yeah, because I originally was using,
oh my god, no, that is something we did not touch on, was the control scheme, like the original control. Like I don't even really know how because I didn't play the original, so I missed, like, the control scheme is very different than obviously anything we're used to now.
Yeah, I just used a keyboard and mouse because I didn't want to bother seeing if a controller worked. And I can't remember if, I don't think WASD was used
I don't
that
think
early.
so.
I think if anything, it was the directional keys. But the Steam version I used, you could use WASD, but only for forward, back, left, and right. And again, I could have looked that up. Maybe there was a strife, but as far as I could tell, there wasn't. But it also used the mouse, so you could really move. You could really cook it if you push W and moved your mouse forward. You could like sprint or whatever. But before I remembered that, it was throwing off a little bit of my movement because I was trying to aim left and right with the mouse, and just kind of move with W and S. And I was like, oh yeah, you can move forward with the mouse. Like I can't remember if that's like how we used to do it, like dragging the mouse back and forth. But it was that was again just a little funny thing. Like, oh yeah, a little relic of the past. Yeah.
Like way back when I was definitely keyboard only. Wolfenstein with a mouse just like messes me up. The idea of it. Like, the Super Nintendo version supports mouse. But I did not go find my mouse because I was like, I can't.
From like Mario Paint.
Yeah. But I just could not wrap my head around that. So I preferred this using a controller over using a mouse. But the game's controls were simple enough that the controller was fine, right? It just had 4 directional movement. You could strafe. I think you can strafe by holding a face button and then moving left and right. Switch weapons, shoot, and then find secret door.
Yeah.
Those are the buttons.
Well, Aidan, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up? Or did you kind of get them out during the conversation?
I kind of got them out there, but I think that Wolfenstein's really interesting. I think that, you know, the DOS original obviously has like a very important place in games history, and it's fun to go back to. I think that Wolfenstein is just also interesting because there's so many different versions of it. The Super Nintendo version that I'm been talking about all episode was like designed or ported in-house by id. It was supposed to be ported by, I think, Interplay, but for a variety of reasons that didn't happen. So like they brought it in-house and made the Super Nintendo version, which is kind of fun to think about. And then, you know, there's funky versions like the Game Boy Advance version, which has all like a bunch of music on the cart, but nobody programmed it into the game. And so it's just like it's silent, which is the way I prefer Wolfenstein 3D, sound effects only, but not intentionally. And then there's like legitimately interesting versions on the Jaguar and the 3DO, like not consoles that usually get their time in the their time to shine. But when it came to Wolfenstein 3D, Jaguar and 3DO had some pretty cool versions that I think people should check out if they have a way to play Jaguar games.
It's actually funny. So, when is this? This is coming out in April. So, I, back in December, just a few months ago, I went to this Atari party near me. Actually, a couple people that I've had on the pod, not Ben Jedwards, Kevin Bunch from, Atari Archive and whatnot. He was gonna be there. He ended up not being able to go. But the Atari party is pretty much just it's like a little, like enthusiast gathering for people who like Atari stuff, whether it's games or computers or otherwise. Someone set up a Jaguar with Wolfenstein 3D on it, and I was playing it there. It honestly played really well. I had a really good time in the Jaguar version of Wolfenstein 3D, believe it or not. It was a pretty solid port.
Yeah, it's sweet. And like, I was, again, watching a video about it today, the Jaguar controller had all these, like, it had this number pad, keypad thing. And so it had like quick save, auto save buttons right on the controller. So you could just press one of 3 buttons and it would auto save to, quick save slot 1, 2, or 3, which is pretty cool on a like console game in the mid 90s. Like you didn't see that kind of stuff. So just, an interesting place where I think there was just a lot of experimentation. And the Jaguar version of it exists because id wanted to see if the Jaguar could run Doom. So they did a gussied up version of Wolfenstein as sort of a test case. And again, that comes back to this idea that like they were just so driven by like leading edge technology and being the first and exploring spaces that nobody had explored before. And so they're constantly experimenting and, testing things out and trying things. And I just think that makes id in the early 90s just one of the most fascinating companies, to dig into their history at this point.
And this was just like a small little like taste of id's history in this episode. Like I feel like we covered a lot of ground with this, like whether it was just the conversation about we talked about before, portrayal of Nazi stuff, or just like the progression that id took, and even like Wolfenstein and how like the game kind of where it started, where it ended up, and like the progression of id and everything. Like there's what's interesting is I think what's more interesting about Wolfenstein, and I've said it a bunch, so I'm not going to repeat it, but I might say it in a slightly different way that adds a little bit more info to it, is that Wolfenstein 3D feels like it's the inflection point. Maybe not inflection is the right word, but it's the game where all these different storylines of game history branch out of, either branch into or branch out of, whether it's, early, if you think about, I mentioned before, the first Wolfenstein game is one of the most is a super influential early example of a stealth game that branched into Wolfenstein. So it's like that has its own branch, stealth game history. And then it goes into Wolfenstein 3D, and that's like first person shooter history. But then you also, in terms of like tech improvements in game history, in terms of video games, like there is like Wolfenstein 3D, just it's this weird section where it's nowhere near as popular as its successor, but it has this really larger than life presence in game history, and for obviously people who enjoyed the game and played it. But like it feels like so many things start there, end there, or like pass through it. You know what I mean? Like there's just so much about this game. I just find that really interesting. That I mean, that's pretty much my final thoughts. In all honesty, that's about all I got for this episode. But guys, thank you so much for joining me. This was awesome. I was genuinely worried, like, would we have enough to talk about for this game? And even without the heavier conversation towards the beginning of the episode, I think there was a lot to sink our teeth into with this. So I'm really grateful both of you came on and helped me out with this. So thank you for giving some of your time to be on this episode with me. So I'm going to throw it over to both of you for plugs and shout outs and things that you would like to promote. Ashton, we'll start off with you. Where can the good people find you online, if you are to be found online, and what would you like to promote?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me, Josh. It's great to be back on after not getting to talk to you for a while. So I lately I'm mostly helping out a few other podcasts, primarily Retro Hangover. They have a really good Discord community that has a good mix of other podcasters and retro gaming enthusiasts. So you'll find lots of cool people there, and probably find other cool podcasts like Still Loading Podcast. But yeah, if you are looking to talk to me for some reason, that's a good place. Retro Hangover Discord is a good place to start. Feel free to message me. But that's about it. Yeah, helping out a few other podcasts here and there, but that's probably the best place. And lots of fun stuff to do beyond podcasting with gaming competitions, like little high score challenges, and kind of a book club style game of the month.
Yeah, the Retro Hangover review crew.
Yeah, lots of cool stuff you can do there. If listening to podcasts isn't enough for you, we got plenty of other fun stuff, cool people to hang with. So that's
Awesome.
it. Just Google Retro Hangover Podcast. You'll probably get there eventually.
I will put the link tree that they always promote at the end of their episodes in the show notes. So if people want to find that, they can find all the places that you can find Retro Hangover over there. Aidan, what about you? Where can the good people find you online, and what would you like to promote?
Yeah, so I'm always on Blue Sky. Far too often. You can find me there. I'm at Aidan is Fun. Aidan is .fun because I'm fun. I also just launched a new podcast in March called Fun Factor. You can find it at funfactorpod.com. And it's a podcast where every episode, my friend Ty and I pick an old retro video game magazine, and we do a flip through. We look at, features and previews, and then we get to a review, and we review the review, and we read through it. We talk about the game. Sometimes it's a very good game, like Final Fantasy VII. Sometimes it's a bad game. We look at the review, look at what critics and, video game writers and journalisms were talking about back then, how it impacted gaming culture for, a bunch of kids writing for kids, but also how it's still shaping gaming culture 25, 30 years later. It's called Fun Factor. You can find it on all the podcast platforms, or you can find it at our website, funfactorpod.com.
And you also, it's not going to be out when this episode comes out. It'll be out a little bit, but you have a new book coming too.
Oh, yes, I do. I forgot. I also have a book coming. It will be coming in 2026. I recently announced it as well in March. It's been a busy month for me. It's called Suikoden 1 and 2, and it's about the Lunar series. No, I'm kidding. It's a book from Boss Fight Books about the history and legacy of Suikoden 1 and 2. So it's coming in 2026, and I'm very excited about it because I love Suikoden 1 and 2, and if you haven't, you should play the remasters because they're very good.
Yes,
Nice.
Y'all should. Well, please go check out everyone's stuff. I will have links to both of their stuff in the show notes, so please look at the show notes to check that out. As well, I also have the credits for the music that I use. I always forget to shout that out. I do put the credits for all the music I use in the episode description, so in the episode notes. But as for myself, you can follow me on Facebook. I'm not actually, you know what? I'm not really active on there. It's mainly Blue Sky and Instagram. Those are the two places I'm most active on. At StillLoadingPod, the Blue Sky is at stillloadingpod.bsky.social, blah blah. Because I can't figure out how to link to my own website. It's fucking weird. But I'm on Blue Sky mainly, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod. I'm also on Twitch at StillLoadingPod, where I stream usually twice a week, depending on the night. Usually Saturday nights for sure, and then whenever the hell I can get around to it the rest of the time. Sometimes Tuesday nights as well, after I'm hanging out with my buddy Andrew over the Experience Point on his Twitch channel, where we do Talk Tuesday. Every Tuesday, it's like a little mini just kind of catch up and what have you experienced throughout the week type of thing. So yeah, and I stream a lot throughout the rest of the week too, whenever I have time. So at StillLoadingPod over on Twitch. If you want to support the show, you can do so in a number of ways. You can give it a 5-star rating or review on whichever podcasting app you use. It does help more people find the show. It helps bump up those charts and algorithms and shenanigans like that. I don't know, but it does help more people find the show. And if you really like the show, I got a lot of extra bonus stuff over on Patreon, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you get all the episodes a little bit earlier with better audio quality, along with patron voting rights, which help guide the direction of the show. So if you would like to vote on games that I will cover on there, I do quarterly polls, and at the beginning of the year, I do a big backlog month poll, which will come out in October. I have a whole bunch of games thrown up on there, and my patrons vote for 4 of them. They pick 4 of the 16 the games that I throw up there to pick which games to help me get off my backlog. So that there's lots of polls that go on over there throughout the year. That's all only for $1 a month. For $3 a month, you get everything I mentioned prior, plus patron shoutouts, which you heard at the beginning of this episode. For $4 a month, you get everything I mentioned prior, plus 2 mini bonus episodes that come out every month. And for $5 a month, you get all of that. All of the previous tiers, plus access to my monthly movie podcast, which at the time this episode is coming out, it is still family, my monthly Fast and Furious movie podcast, where all the guests who join me aren't just friends. They're family. So if you want to go over to Patreon and check out all that stuff, it's patreon.com/stillloadingpod. And in relation to the Patreon, this month, all the Patreon money that I will be bringing in is going to be donated to the Trevor Project. Everything for Punch and Nazi Month, all the money from Patreon during Punch and Nazi Month goes to the Trevor Project. You do not have to sign up for the Patreon for me to donate more. Just donate it yourself. Don't put me in the middleman and let Patreon take a cut of it. All right. So if you want to, join along with me and support the cause during Punch and Nazi Month, please consider giving to the Trevor Project as well. But that's it. That is all the time I have for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Ashton and Aidan, thank you once again for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.